Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Code Club here on the Riffomonas channel. I am live streaming weekly, typically Wednesday mornings at 9 a.m. if you want to join live. Otherwise, you're more than welcome to watch it later or re-watch it later. And I think you get all the comments and everything that comes along. As you log in this morning, I would love it if you were to drop a line telling us who you are and where you're from. I'm always impressed by the global reach that this channel gets. And it's a lot of fun. Let me just double check that people are actually tuning in to this. I always fear that when I do these live streams that I'm just talking to myself. And there have been a few times actually where I have been talking to myself. So just check that. I think we're live. And so the visual that we are going to be making this week is this plot from the New York Times that they published a few weeks ago. Based on a poll that they conducted with Siena back at the beginning of September. New York City is in the midst of a big political campaign to elect a new mayor, and they, the leading mayoral candidate, as I understand it, is more of a left-leaning politician, and I think perhaps more left-leaning than most people are used to in the Democratic Party, which is the left party here in the United States. And so there's a variety of policies that are being floated, that he is floating. And the New York Times obviously wanted to get people's opinions on these polls. And what they found, without going too much into the specific details of the issues, is that people in New York City, when they're asked if they supported a policy, supported these policies, right? But when they said, should New York City do this, that by and large, people said they weren't as enthusiastic, right? Let's just say, right? With the exception of perhaps increasing taxes on the wealthiest. And they basically had equal agreement. But, you know, if the policy was let's add 5,000 police officers, people said, yes, this is a policy I support. But if they said, should New York City do this, then 10 percentage points fewer people supported that when it was made real for New York City. This is what we call NIMBYism, N-I-M-B-Y, which stands for not in my backyard. Another example of NIMBYism is that people get really excited about wind and solar and alternative forms of energy production. But if you then say, hey, can I put a gigantic wind turbine in your backyard? They say, well, I don't support it that much, right? So that's kind of what's happening in this poll. In an urban setting, okay? And so I don't want to get into the politics of this. I thought this was an interesting figure that I wanted to go about making with you all here on this live stream. And so that's what we're going to do today. Last week I made, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, a week and a half ago or so, I made a video using Positron, which is a different IDE, integrated development environment, from what I normally use of RStudio. And so late last week, I put up a poll and said, hey folks, would you rather I make this upcoming video in RStudio, Positron, or VS Code? And people wanted me to go back to RStudio. It was pretty close between RStudio and Positron, but maybe in another episode or so, we'll go back and try Positron again. I had a variety of questions and problems that I was running into with Positron that I posted on the Positron discussion forum, and so I got some answers, and some of you actually gave me some feedback on things to try, and so we can circle back to that. So again, this is the figure that we are going to be generating in today's episode. Great to have Mike from the UK again, Hassan Kak from Marshall University in West Virginia, and Saeed from Somalia. So one of the reasons that I didn't make a video last week was because we were getting ready for my third child, my son, to get married. So he got married last Thursday, and they are actually in West Virginia right now on their honeymoon. So it's great to have Hassan joining from Marshall University, a great institution in West Virginia. It's a beautiful state, and they're really enjoying seeing a lot of the natural beauty there. So it's great to be back with you all making videos, and I think my schedule is pretty clear. No major life-changing events coming up for anyone in my family that I'm aware of, and so we should be able to make our weekly live streams every Wednesday morning. If you want to put that on your calendar, 9 a.m. Eastern US time. All right, so if you want to learn more about these visuals and kind of the course of plans that I have in making these videos, I strongly encourage you to subscribe to my newsletter. If you go to riffomonas.org. I'll go ahead and paste this into the chat. If you haven't already subscribed, you can join the mailing list. I put out one email a week where I highlight some data visualization that I have found out in the wild. And so this is kind of a web-based version of this. And so this is the figure that I showed you, right, from the New York Times. And so it gives you some background on the data, briefly what it describes. Again, my goal is not to be political in putting up these videos, but to give kind of a 30,000-foot view of what's going on in this visual. And so the newsletter then goes through kind of my general way of thinking about how I would make this visual. There's maybe function names in here, but there's not like specifics on how I would implement things, right? That's what I save for these live streams, okay? So if you wanted to learn more about this article, actually, let me go ahead and copy and paste the link to the blog post in here. And then if you wanted to get the New York Times article, I'll paste that into here as well. And again, this was an article by Nate Cohen, and you can read about this poll and their results, right? I also have access to a free version of this, which is on archive.is. Archive.is is I find to be a really great site for this for these live streams. If you go to archive.is and then I copy and paste the URL in here and click save, it then pops up a archived or cached version of the article. It does do kind of funny things to some visualizations. So I'm not going to work off this version. I'm instead going to be working off this version, okay? And yeah, so I'd encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter so you can get my thoughts on these visuals and how I'd go about implementing them. I'm always looking for suggestions on different data visualizations that I can cover. I do a lot from the New York Times because the New York Times has a pretty big data science, data journalism department where they have a lot of articles that have visuals. The Washington Post used to have a guy named Philip Bump. He's no longer there as of about a month or two ago. And so kind of my options for getting things from the popular media are shrinking. It takes a bit of effort to go out and find things. So if you see something and I can kind of distribute that effort to people watching these videos, send me a link and I'll check it out. If you go to pat@riffomonas.org, or if you subscribe to the newsletter and reply to the newsletter with your suggestion, that'll get directly to me. All right, let's get going on generating this figure. I see that we've got Fabian from Hamburg, Shiva from Northern Ireland. Welcome. Thanks for joining in. As always, if you have questions along the way or suggestions for things to try, let me know. I'm happy to kind of pause my plan and do what's going to work best for you all to learn the best. I've got this policy wording.r script open here in my version of RStudio. I have gone ahead and made this tribble to create the data frame. So I'm not doing a lot of copying and pasting. I'm going to focus on generating the visual in this episode rather than going out and getting the data and kind of building things out that way. I think we'll still have enough work to do on our own. If you want to get this R script as well as the version that I finish with at the end of this episode, if you go down below into the description of this video after this recording is done, there'll be a link there to a blog post where you can go and get all of the code that I have generated for today's episode, okay? Okay, so Lori is in Canada, in Saskatchewan. Great. Lori, my son, another one of my sons, went up to Saskatoon a couple weeks ago for a wedding. And he wasn't a big fan of the flat, open expanses of southern Saskatchewan, but I think that's pretty cool. So anyway, thanks for joining in. So we are in RStudio. And one of the things I noticed when I launched RStudio yesterday or the day before, that there's a new version of RStudio. I went through the release notes of for the new release, and I didn't really notice anything that is going to change anything about how I use RStudio or how I think most people use RStudio. So if you get that pop-up of, do you want to update your version of RStudio, I'd say go for it. There's nothing that's going to break by any means in your use of the software. So I'll go ahead and load the tidyverse library. This comes with a variety of packages. One thing I want to call your attention to is that I updated ggplot2. There's a new version 4.0.0. I don't know that I'm going to go too much into detail about kind of what the new version offers in this episode. We'll probably hit that in another episode down the road. The new version of ggplot2 has a number of big changes to the theme function and kind of how people interact with the theme function. I think they noticed that a lot of people were struggling with the theme function when they looked at people's code that are posted to GitHub, perhaps. And so they've been trying to do things to make that function a little bit easier. So we'll see if we have need for that as we go through today's episode, but just wanted to call that attention to that there is a new version of ggplot2 out there. It's not going to break anything that you've been doing if you've been using the previous version of ggplot2, but just wanted you to know about that. So we'll go ahead and load this Tribble. Tribble will create a tibble for us, and this one has 10 rows and 3 columns. And so I am putting the policy, so basically add 5,000 police officers, limit rent stabilization by income, and so forth. I am calling that the policy. And then whether it's generally supported versus New York City should do this as the choice, and then the value for percentage. And so let me shrink this down a little bit, like so. And so, like I said, if we think about add 5,000 police officers, support 73, that's what we've got here, 73 and 63. When I put in this percentage column, these values, I put them as numbers because rather than as text, so you'll see like this 73 has a percent sign next to it. So we'll add that percent later when we go ahead and add this, because as I'm thinking about this figure, the X aesthetic, the position on the X axis is going to be numeric, right? And so let's kind of think about how we would go about building this figure. So some of the things that stand out to me about this figure, I think the thing that caught me initially was that they have titles for each pair of bars. And I thought that was interesting. It got me thinking about like, well, how would I do that? I could create like 5 different bar plots, each with their own title, and then I could use something like Patchwork to pull those all together, right? I think a lot of people in the sciences might create 5 different figures and then put them into PowerPoint or Illustrator to put together their own figure. But I'm trying to do everything in a scripted, automated way so that it's reproducible. So that, say, like if a 6th question was added, you know, how would we most easily incorporate that? Or if they repeat this poll in a year, how could I reuse this code most effectively to be reproducible? Anyway, so these titles got me excited in a weird way. And so like, it kind of got me thinking about how would I make the bars in general, right? So the X aesthetic would be the percent, right? So like the 73, 63, right? The Y position could be the policy, right? So like add 5,000 police officers. And then I could do the fill by whether it's supported or New York City should do it. That's the choice, right? And so then what we'd get, we'd have like the add 5,000 police officers off on the left-hand margin. And we could probably fiddle with like the horizontal and vertical justification to move that title to be above the bars, right? And I thought that might be, so that's one way to do it. It might be a bit kludgy. The other approach that I thought was cool, and that we're going to push through here, I think, is using facets, right? So if we use facet wrap, we could think of each of these 5 bar plots as a different facet, right? And so we could use facet wrap with 1 column, and we could facet on the policy. And that way then we could use the Y position could be the choice, as well as the fill could be choice. Does that make sense? And so then we could play with the formatting of the title, the strip, for each of those facets to get it to be left justified, okay? The other thing that this plot has going on then would be that the text for the choice, support or New York City should do this, is embedded in the bar. So if we're doing this as a facet, we could position those using like geom text. So that works. We could also fiddle again with the margins on the y-axis text to get it to be inside the bar, okay? And so there's two options there. Another thing that caught my eye was that they don't have an x-axis label or numbers, right? They put the values off to the right side of the text. I kind of like that because it keeps things simple and easier to interpret. When they do that, though, we are assuming that they're anchoring everything at 0, right? So if you have a bar plot, it's really hard to imagine a case where you should not anchor everything at 0 on the bottom of the bar, right? You can make things look wildly different if we said, this was like 40%, right? Or if it was 50% or something like that. But if they're not going to put the x-axis, then we've got to assume that over here on the left, where my cursor is, I don't know if you can see that, is 0. So these percentage labels was another interesting addition. I'm also always a sucker for them putting legend information in the title or subtitle, right? So support the policy having this orangish color, and New York City should do the policy having this greenish color, right? I love that. I think that's really cool. We don't get to do that enough in science. Perhaps we could for figures going into like a slide deck for a presentation, but like our scientific papers don't really allow for that type of text. And so I want to show you how I would go about doing that. We'll use one of my favorite packages to go with ggplot, which is tidy text, or I'm sorry, not tidy text, GG text. And then we've got different fonts going on. So there's a few things here going on. If you have questions along the way, by all means, throw something into the comments, and I would be happy to take a brief diversion to go on that path. So now let's see here. Let's come down, and we've got our Tibble loaded, and we're going to pipe this into ggplot. And then our aesthetics on the x-axis, we're going to put the percentage. On the y, let's start with policy, and we'll shift to using a facet, and then fill. Let's do choice, and then we'll do geom_call, and then I have written up this ggsave statement policy wording.png with the same aspect ratio as the original figure here. So the figure is a smidge taller than it is wide. And so these are the dimensions that I worked out to recreate. I'm getting this check pf proj. I don't know what that is from. I've never seen that before. So I'm going to ignore it and hope it goes away, or hope that it doesn't really matter. And then let me go to my desktop, to this policy wording, and then looking at the figure. And so let me shrink this down to the same aspect ratio as what they had here. And we see a few things, right? We see the horizontal layout. We see the categories or the policies on the y-axis. It's in a different order from what they have. Mine is in alphabetical order, starting from the bottom and going to the top. That is the ggplot default way of doing things. So we'll have to play with the order here. But the biggest issue that I see immediately, as we've talked about in previous live streams, is that by default, geom_call will stack the bars on top of each other, or left right with each other, right? Good to see you, Rents. Good to see you, Malzy31 from Connecticut. Great to have you all. And so to get that side-by-side appearance, I can come in and we can do position equals position dodge, and that's a function. And now when we look at this, we see that those bars are put, I guess, on top of, I'll say side by side, just because we're used to normally having bar plots go across the x-axis. I'll also add that I like this horizontal view because these titles are rather long. And if they were down at the bottom and our bars were vertical, then the titles would run into each other. And then what you would have to do is that you would then have to perhaps angle those labels. And then that just gets messy and it gets hard to read, right? So anyway, we'll leave it there. So I think we've got our bars more or less right. We'll play with the colors later. And we'll also get rid of this legend later. But for now, what's bugging me is the order of the policies and the order, I guess the choices are in the right order. So the legend, NYC should do this, is on top, support is on the bottom, but the bars themselves are in the right order, right? So like this teal is support, corresponds to the orange in their version. New York City is the green in theirs, and that's the reddish color in mine. So let's think about the policy ordering, okay? So to do that, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do a mutate on policy, and I'm going to use factor. So I'm going to make it a factor. And so a factor is a type of categorical data that has an order. So it's ordinal data, right? So we can define policy as a factor, and then we can say levels, and we can then put in the levels we want, right? And that's basically the values in the policy column. But if I do that, I get an error because my factor levels are duplicated, right? And so you'll see that, like, you know, we've got the same policy 2 rows in a row, right? Each policy is duplicated twice. So I think what I could do would be to do something like unique. So if I had, say, X, and let's define a vector of like A, C, let me do A, C, C, B, B, okay? So that's kind of what I have, right? And I could do would be like unique on X. And what I'm wondering is, does that come back to me ABC or does that come back to me ACB? Because what I'd like to do then is run unique on the policy column. So let's see what this does. And sure enough, that gives me ACB. That preserves the order. I'm curious if unique on its own will order things for us. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it does. I think if we wanted to sort it, you would have to then add a sort to it. So anyway, I'm not going to worry about that. And so what we can then do is use that knowledge now to come in here and do unique on policy. And then we need to pipe this into the rest of our ggplot stuff. Oh, I got to run the line. And so now what we see is that we're no longer alphabetizing things, right? We have add 5,000 police officers, limit rent stabilization by income, freeze prices, increase, make buses free. So it's the same order, but it's flipped, right? The one at the bottom corresponds to the top, and the next step from the bottom corresponds to the right before the top, right? So we need to flip that order. And I think the easiest way to do that then would be to do rev on the unique policy. And so again, if you think about, we did unique X, that's ACB, but what I want would be BCA. If I then do rev on unique X, that gets me BCA, right? And so now if I run all this, I now see that I've got the order of those groupings consistent, right? So that works pretty well. And great, Andres, to have you joining us from Stockholm. Wonderful. And Trevor from Virginia. Awesome. Thanks for joining, everyone. All right. So again, from here, I'm wondering, like, what do we do with these Y labels? And something that we could do would be to like play with this position dodge. So width, so there's width in position dodge, but there's also width in geom call. So I think if I did like width equals, let's do 1, then that makes the bars wider. If I did width equals 0.2, that makes them more narrow and adds in then space in between the different categories, right? And then from there, we could do like theme, and I could do axis.text.y equals element text. And we could then do hjust equals 0, and that would get those to be left justified. But then I could then change the margin and do margin equals margin. And then on the right, I could do like minus 60. And so that, you see, kind of pulls them in, right? Or I could do minus 100. That's further, something like that, right? So that kind of gives you the idea of what we could do. Let me just do 180, just to stay there. This is causing my plot to look a little bit weird, so we'd want to add a left-hand margin, but then I could maybe move those up by doing t equals minus 40. And that's not working. Let's see if I did like vjust equals 1. I put it at the bottom. Okay, vjust equals 0, I think we'll put it at the top. So that moves it up. If I did like minus 80, let's try minus 120. Oh, that's not quite right. I don't know if that mattered though. So you can see that we can perhaps play with the margins. And this is pretty messy, right? I'm not a fan of this. So I think what I'll do is go ahead and remove this theme approach, get us back to here. And instead, what I want to do is go ahead and take the facet wrap approach. And so what I'll do here then is to add in facet underscore wrap, and I can then do tilde policy. So we're going to make each policy its own facet. And then what this does is this will put it in, I guess by default, 2 rows and 3 columns. And there's other stuff going on here, right? Where it then has all of the policies shown on the y-axis for everything, which isn't what I want either. Let's go ahead and try to make it a single column to start. So if we did like ncol equals 1 within facet wrap, I then get my 5 facets, one on top of the other, right? And I'm noticing that it is changing the order of, my facets are in a different order than the y-axis, right? It's back to being reversed. So that's fine. I think there's 2 ways that we could deal with all this extra y-axis text. So one thing we could do would be to do like scales. Is it scale or scales? Scale equals free underscore y, and that free y needs to be in quotes. And so what that does is it removes anything on the y-axis that isn't presented within that facet, right? So that works, right? Something else we could do would be to, we could also remove the scale equals free y. Again, that brings us back to here. And instead of putting policy on the y-axis, we could put the choice on the y-axis. And that way then we would get support NYC should do this on the y-axis, and then we don't have like all the extra stuff, right? Rent asks, could we also add those labels by using geom text? We certainly could, and that would be yet another way to do it, right? I'm going to hold off on doing that because I want to run with this faceted approach, but we could certainly add it with geom text or using annotate with the geom text approach. So that would be, I guess, a third way that we could possibly do things. So I feel like if we do the faceted approach, it perhaps gives us more control over the size and kind of intuition of things. I think I already have this width in here. I could also remove the position dodge. And so this makes my code a lot simpler, I think, to do it this way over pretty much any other way, right? Certainly easier than using theme to kind of get the margins right, or even I think adding geom text to get the titles in here, okay? So let's see, like I said, our order is flipped, and I think the order that I put in here, I had reversed because GG text on the y-axis, if it's got categorical, puts the first category on the bottom and then goes up from there. And so what I'm thinking is from top down, not from bottom up. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that rev function call. And so now we see we've got the add 5,000, limit rent, freeze, increase, make buses free. So we've got the same order that they had over here. Okay, wonderful. And now what we could do is, since we're playing with those titles, let's go ahead and play with the formatting on those strips. And so to do that, we'll go ahead into theme, and the argument is going to be strip.text. This cell at the top of each facet is called a strip. Okay, and so we'll do element text, and we'll do face equals bold to make it bolded. And I'm also going to do hjust equals 0 to make it left justified rather than the center, which is the default. And so now we have those titles justified on the left side, which is cool, right? I'm going to go ahead and also get rid of the extra padding that we have around these bars. And we can do that. I'll do that outside of theme. We'll do chord Cartesian, and I'll do clip equals off, expand equals, I've got the X, expand equals false. The clip equals off allows us to plot stuff outside the plotting window, and expand removes the padding that it puts around it. I don't need to do expand equals, I don't need to do clip equals off, but I find that more times than not, if I do expand equals false, I often want to do clip equals off too. So I'll just go ahead and put that in there just out of habit. And so now what we see is that our bars, so I guess the first thing we see is that all of our facets have the same x-axis scale going from 0 to about, oh, what is that? That's probably about like 73, right? Whatever this support, yeah, it's 73. And then we don't have that extra padding around the bar. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the background as well as those grids. And so we can do that with panel.grid equals element blank. And then we'll do panel.background equals element blank. And so that gives us then a nice white background. And I'm going to leave the strip color in there because I think what we want, well, let's go ahead and do this. We want like make buses free. We want that M to be right on top of the left edge of the bar, right? So I think I want to go ahead in here into the strip text, and we'll do a margin equals margin, and then L, I'm going to do like, let's try -10 to move it more to the left. And so that went too far to the left. So let's do let's do 0 actually. Okay, and I think 0 is what we wanted. I think it automatically had some bit of margin added to it, but when we do the margin L equals 0, then that will, what does that do? That turns everything else to 0, right? Because the default value is 0, and so if I've modified this one, it modifies everything else. So there is a new function that I'm going to try in ggplot2 version 4, which is margin auto. And if you're familiar with CSS, this has more of a CSS type of feel to how CSS uses margins and padding. That I could do like, I could do 2, 0, 2. So what that would be to do 2 on the top, 0 on the right, 2 on the bottom. and it's then going to recycle that 0 from the left to be on the 0 on the right to be 0 on the left. And so what we see then is that we got that, right? We've got some margin on the top and we've got no margin on the bottom. And actually, I don't think I need this other 2 because I think if I say 2, 0, then it's going to put 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom, 0 on the left, 0 on the right. Sure enough. I want a little bit more margin on the top. So let's try 5. And so that gets us, I think, let's try 8. Yeah, so that gets us more on the top and the bottom, but that's probably too much. So let's go ahead and make that, say, 4 and leave it there, and we can adjust that later. So again, that function, margin auto, allows us to have a more like CSS type of approach to defining our margins, and that is coming from this new version of ggplot2 version 4. Okay, so there you go. There's some new functions just out in the last couple of weeks. All right, so I think now that we've done that, let's go ahead and remove the background color of the strip. And so then we could do strip.background equals element blank. And so then that removes that background. And as I am playing with the text here, let's go ahead and use the Libre Franklin font that is kind of like what the New York Times uses. So we can get that with library show text, get that loaded, and we'll then do font add Google. And the free version is Libre, which is free, Franklin. And we'll then do Franklin as the family. And then we need to add 2 more functions to make that work. That is going to be show text, opts DPI equals 300, and then show text auto, which will basically load all the stuff. And so then to use the Franklin family, I can come down to theme and then do text equals element text, and then we'll do family equals Franklin. And so what this will do is this will use the Franklin or the Libre Franklin font in every text element of my plot. And so I don't know if you can totally see it, but that's that now is the Libre Franklin font. I like this font better than kind of the typical sans serif default Arial. And so I don't mind using it over and over. It is bolded like theirs. And yeah, okay. So I think we've got the facets in pretty good shape. In regards to that text, I think because I've been talking about text, let's now turn our attention to this y-axis text. So again, there's 2 ways that we could do this. One would be to we could use the margin approach that I used earlier when I was trying to make these titles without faceting. We could also use geom text like Rents mentioned. And so maybe what we'll do is try both, right? And so Nick, welcome from Greece. And Naeem, yes, we are using facet wrap to make these panels. So let's try both approaches and see what we like, okay? So what we can then do is axis.text.y equals element text. And we'll then do hjust equals 0. And that will get the text to be left justified. And then again, we can mess with the margin to move it into the bar. So we can do margin equals margin, and then R, I could do like minus 100. And so that then moves the text into the bar a bit, right? It kind of looks funny because we've still got like the title and the ticks and everything over there. But if I wanted to come more in, like say 120, then that makes things look really weird. So maybe what we need to do is add a plot.margin, and we can do margin, and then let's see. I'm looking back at their plot to see if they've got similar margins all the way around, And I think they do. So let's try that auto margin again. So we could do auto margin, and let's do 10. And so this is going to use 10 all the way around. Oh, not auto margin, margin auto. All right. This is why we practice with things, right? So that got me 10 all the way around, but it's looking kind of funny. If we do minus 100, that's all right. Like maybe if we did like L equals 20, would that bump it in a bit? That gives us kind of like a hanging indent like we're looking for. So if we did like L equals 10, it's not quite 10. I think maybe it should be more like 3, right? And so the text is just dodged in a bit from the edge, right? So that's one way to do it, okay? So that's method 1, which was, and actually let me see if I need that plot margin after all. Yeah, I don't really need that plot margin to pull this off. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that for now. So this is like, I'll call this option 1 to put a choice within bar, okay? So we'll leave that there and we'll come back to it. Option 2 then would be to do what Rents suggested with the labels and use geom text. And so what we could do would be to come back up here and do geom underscore text, and we'll do AES label equals choice. And then like the X position, let's do X equals 3. And what that'll do is that'll put my text here with each Y position, right, being altered depending on what's in the data frame. And the X position will be 3 for everything. Okay, so let's see how this works. Get a plus sign on here. And it did it, although it's center justified. So let's try to do left justified on that geom text. We'll do hjust equals 0. Did I do that? There we go. Sometimes I run through this so quickly that I don't give it enough time to catch up. And so I like this approach better than playing with the margins because I'm going to be able to put in with pretty good precision where I want that text to be in the bar, whereas playing with the margin units is going to be pretty funky, right? So let's run with this, okay? And so I will call this as option 2 to put the choice within the bar, okay? And there we go. My computer's being a little slow. So if we do this, then there's more work we need to do, right? We need to clean up and get rid of the y-axis text, ticks, and title. We also need to do the same thing from the x-axis, right? And so in theme, we could then come in here and we could do axis.title equals element blank, axis.text equals element blank, and axis.ticks element blank. And then that gets rid of all that, right? Cool. And yeah. So that, what'd I do? All right. So that cleans that up pretty nicely. The font is still using, so the downside of this, if it's a downside, is that the font that's being used is the default, I think, Arial font, right? It's not using the Libre Franklin font. So let's go ahead and change that to the Libre Franklin font. And to do that, we're gonna have to come back up here to geom text and do family equals Franklin. And so that we can see changes the font. I don't know what the actual font size will be, but their title font here for add 5,000 police officers and support, those appear to be about the same size. So let's try to get those to match. And so let's start with the strip text, and we can do size equals 10. And let's put these next to each other and see if that's about right. I think that's about right. So we're going to use a 10-point font then in our text. So then let's go in here and we'll do size equals 10. And we then want to do size.unit equals pt to have, to basically we're specifying the unit on our size argument. It's 10 rather than, what is the other option? Let me look at that. So if we do geom text, does it tell us what the size is? Size unit by default is millimeters. Yeah, so I'd rather it be points. All right, cool. So now when we look at this, we see the fonts might be too big. I don't know. That does seem kind of big, but we'll adjust that later, as well as the size of the bars. Maybe what we could do then is to bump the choice value to the left a smidge. And so right now it's at 3. Let's go ahead and make it 1. Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Cool. All right. So hopefully you can see that this is coming together nicely. Since we're working on the bars, let's go ahead and turn our attention to the color, the fill color on those bars. So to match that fill color, I'm going to come into my application utilities and pull up my digital color meter. I love this tool for doing this color matching stuff. And so I'm going to highlight this rectangle, and then we'll come in here and I'll go ahead and do scale fill manual. And then we'll do values equals a vector. And so it's going to be that orangish color and, oh, where'd you go? This greenish color. And then we'll add that in. There you go. And so what I see is that the order now is flipped. So support is green rather than orange. And so let's come back in here and I can switch the order very easily. And let's see how it looks. Cool. Now we have support as orange and New York City with this green color. I no longer need the legend. And so to get rid of the legend, there's a few ways to do it, but I'll do it over here in geom call, where I will then do show.legend equals false. And that gets rid of the legend. Cool. All right. Is there a package that aligns elements, say align objects EFT with 0.1 margin and then uses per or something to iterate over the elements? If not, there should be. So there is something like that. So what? I think like if I set my text, sorry, if I did like size equals 10, then that sets my text to be a 10-point font. And then what I could do within like strip text is I could do like rel2. And so that's going to be twice the size of the text in the layer above it, right? So if the text is size 10 and I do rel2, then it's going to be a 20-point text, right? So let's see if that works. This should be the title of each of the facets. Yeah, so that makes it bigger, right? And so you can do that with like text and I think line. I think there's a few other arguments within theme. So if we look at theme, you can see like line, rect, title, point, polygon, like these arguments, you can set values and then downstream of them. And again, this is like a hierarchy. You can then, and it'll inherit, and you can then say rel. So it's relative to the previous element, right? Whereas if I did like 0.2, we then see that like the title is itty bitty, right? I don't tend to use the relative argument. If you look at how kind of the built-in themes like theme gray or theme BW, they use a lot of the relative approach. I'm going to roll with using the actual size. I also don't think then that I can use, it would be much harder, I think, to use the relative size for this. But now that I think about that, I want to try something. So like I said, there's this new version of ggplot2. I think I had it open. Nope, that's not it. Let's see, tidyverse. Here we go. There's this blog announcing the new version of ggplot2. And one of the things, maybe in labels, not in labels, there's a lot of stuff in here that, let me think here. This is the problem with me going off script, is that I have to find these things, but that's cool. I want to do that because I want to see if this will work. I think there's a way to grab the aesthetic from the theme, right? Oh, I clicked on the link accidentally. No, don't. All right. So from theme accent. I wonder if I could do like from theme text. Let's try. So we're experimenting here. So we'll do from theme text. No. Yeah, it's not happy with that. So from theme strip.text. Yeah, maybe this needs to be in quotes. Does that need to be in quotes? No. All right. Let's see, from theme accent. So this is, accent is kind of a new argument to theme, and I'm going to go back to what I had. So this should have been without quotes, and if we do it from theme text, and if I use remove the size unit PT, yeah, it's not happy with that. I wonder if maybe in the future they would allow us to connect the geom text size with theme elements, right? Because I wouldn't want, you could imagine wanting kind of a proportion between like the title of the plot and the title of the annotation text. So I'll go back to size 10, size.unit equals PT. And I actually think that would be very useful. Like if they could come up with a way to connect kind of my text elements in the theme to the size of the text element, or the family, say, in both places. I think that would actually be really useful. I'll probably file an issue or feature request after this episode is over. All right, enough of that diversion. We're back to here. Okay, so we've gotten rid of our legend. Our colors are right. Now what we want to do is let's go ahead and put in the numeric value off to the right. And so we're going to do another geom text. And so we'll do geom text, and we'll do AES label equals percentage. And then let's leave it there. And then we'll go ahead and add this in. And so now what we get is our percentage is centered on the percentage, right? And so we want it to actually be to the right. And so if I came in and did hjust equals 1 to make it right justified, let's see if that's enough. Oh, yes. So it's right justified on the percentage, but we want it to be left justified on the percentage. Again, that's easy enough to change. And so now we see it's left justified. So I could like add like 1 or 2 to the value of percentage. There's also a nudge argument in geom text, right? That we could do like nudge x equals 2. And so now we see that that puts it off to the right a bit. And so maybe we want to go back to say nudge 1. And that'll be, we'll see how that does. We're noticing that like the 73 up here at the top is getting clipped off. I also don't have the percentages on those numbers. So let's add the percentage sign first. And so what we could do is in here in our label, I could do paste 0 percentage comma percent sign. And this then will add a percent sign to my percentages and then use that as the label. And so now what we see is that we've got our percentages. I'm also remembering that I don't have all this stuff with my font family and size. So let me go ahead and copy and paste this down. And so now we've got our Franklin font off to the right side, but we do have this problem of my 73 getting clipped because it goes off the right side of the plot. Actually, this is where clip equals off is useful, because if clip equals on, which is the default, we wouldn't even see that 7 because the edge of the screen would be kind of right there, right? So this is where clip equals off is useful. But I want to expand the x-axis. And we can do that in chord Cartesian, where we can then do xlim. We're going to go from 0, let's try 90. And so that then expands the right side of the plot and kind of brings everything else in, right? And let's see how these kind of compare. So I think we want to increase the range of the x-axis more to bring things to the left more. So let's go ahead and put it up to 100. And I think that actually did it, right? So now our bars are pretty close to the same length as their bars, okay? And of course, we've got the percent sign. I think the spacing between the bar and the number, that first digit, is pretty good. Cool. All right. So let's go ahead and think about our titles now, okay? And so I'll do that up here right before theme. We'll do labs, and we'll do title equals, and I'm gonna copy and paste because I don't like to type under fire when everyone's watching me, because you'll know I'll screw up. And then I'll go ahead and grab this title, this subtitle, right? That goes off the right side, and then we'll do caption equals this. And we'll then go ahead and pop that in, okay? And so one thing I'm noticing is that the caption has double quotes in it, right? And so I'm using a double quote to define the string. And so you'll notice, like, it thinks this is one string and this is another string, and it thinks these are variables or something, right? So I could use like single quotes here, and that solves the problem where if you have single quotes on the inside, you can have double quotes on the inside. That's not what I want to do. I like having double quotes. So what I could do is put a backslash before their quote sign. And that backslash is like an escape character to say, I actually want a quote character in my string. And I did something, I think I forgot to add a plus down here. Whenever you get this type of output that looks like this from ggplot, that typically tells me I forgot to add a plus sign to connect my pipeline, my ggplot stuff together. And so now what we see is that we've got our title, our subtitle, and our caption. That all looks great. I am going to, Let's start at the bottom. The caption and the subtitle go off the right side of the screen, and that bugs me. So, and you'll also see that the caption is right justified. And that it's like, I don't know why, but it then like gives us this 2-6-2025. And I think that's because there's a line break in here. Okay, so get rid of that. Cool. So it's right justified, and it's not, it's not wrapping the text, right? So we can use my favorite package after the tidyverse, a library ggtext. And ggtext will get us a few things. It'll allow us to use Markdown, which will allow us to put color in the text. It will also allow us to wrap the text pretty efficiently. And so if I come in here and then do plot.caption, I can do element text box simple. And so element text box simple should wrap things for me. And there we go. We now see that it has wrapped it nicely for us. And I'm thinking about the font size. And so I think my font is too big because it should end on the would be, whereas mine ends on the who, right? So let's go ahead here and we'll do size equals 8 as a guess. And that seems to be pretty good. I'm noticing that my margin on the left is less than theirs. So let's go ahead and increase the right-hand margin. And we could do that with plot.margin. And again, let's go ahead and do the margin auto. We'll do like 10 and 5. All right. And so I think it can come in more. So let's do 10 on the sides. I think that's pretty good. And yeah, I think that's fine. Then the other thing is that, I don't know, the font could probably be a little bit bigger, but I'm not going to mess with it too much. The Libre Franklin font isn't a perfect replacement for Franklin, but it's pretty good. The font should probably be a gray color. So let's go ahead and do color equals gray 40. That looks good. And the line height, there should be spacing between the lines, right? So let's go ahead and do line height. And let's do like 1.3. And so I think that looks like pretty similar line spacing. Of course, we need more margin on the bottom. So like this element text box simple doesn't always play well with margins, as we can see it kind of running into everything else. So let's come in here and modify its margins. We'll do margin equals margin, and we'll do B equals, what happens if we do 0? Nothing. Okay, let's do 10. All right, let's do T equals 10 too. There we go. So that respects the bottom margin a bit more, and is pretty close. The top margin, we might want to add extra space because we see there is a bit of a gap there. So let's go ahead and make the top 20. All right. Let's maybe go up to 30. Okay. And that's probably too far. Let's take that back to 25. And then let's leave it there for now. I think that looks pretty close. Thanks, Ian, for joining. Great to have you. And so now let's think about the subtitle, right? So the subtitle also wraps. And so for plot.subtitle, we'll do element text box simple. And let's see, the color is black. And our font is too big. So let's go ahead and try a size of, say, 10. I'm pretty sure their subtitle is bigger than their caption size. So let's try that. And so now we see percentage is wrapped. So we've got New York City on the second line, but they have a bit of a margin. Like they kept New York City together for some reason. And so I think our font needs to be bigger, or I'm sorry, smaller, right? So let's try 9. And maybe if we put New York City on the next line, which we could do with a HTML tag BR for a line break. And so that gets there. I think like if we look at where the S is in officers and where the W is in who, that those line up pretty similarly. I think that's pretty good. Yeah, I think happy with that. We could change the line height on the caption, on the subtitle rather. So let's try the 1.3 again. So we'll do line height equals 1.3. That moved it a bit. I think maybe it could be like 1.4. So let's try 1.4 on the subtitle. And that's probably, whatever. It could probably be 1.5, whatever. Let's go ahead and change the color of the font for support a policy in New York City. So I'm going to pull back up my digital color meter and try to grab this orange. I think it is a different orange than what's in the bar. It's a bolder orange. So to do that, we'll come back to support a policy. And I just want to double check, yeah, support a policy, those three words. And then we'll do span, and we'll do style equals, and then in single quotes, I guess, I'll go ahead and do color colon that. And I also want it to be bolded. And so I think what I can do would be font weight colon 800. And I need a close single quote and a close anchor, or a greater than sign, and then I need to close the span here. Okay. So again, I'm inserting HTML and CSS to style the support a policy. And so that got the color. It didn't get the weight. And so, I wonder if I leave, oh, maybe it, is it PX? No. I think I'm trying to be too fancy here. An alternative would be to put B anchors outside the span to be bolded. That gets it bolded. Alternatively, instead of B, we could use Markdown, which would be 2 stars, like so. And so Markdown is kind of a easier version of Markdown, right? So that works. I think I'll go ahead and I'll leave that there. We also want to put in a similar type of thing for the New York City, right? So we'll do span, style equals, and then in single quotes, we'll do color equals something. And then maybe here I'll use the bold tag. So we need to get that color for the New York City text. Grab that, and then I'll plop that in here after color. And then we need to close the span and close the bold. And so now we see that we have, I guess it's New York City should, and support a policy is bolded. Okay, so let's bring in the should. And there we go, we've got New York City should. All right, one thing I'm noticing is that I think our font weight is a little bit lighter than theirs. And so within show text, when I bring in a font like this, I could do like regular weight. So let's see, regular weight. Let me remove my face. Regular weight. So you can see in that pop-up off to the right, the font weight for the regular font face, usually 400. So if I want to make it a heavier weight, I could do, say, 500, okay? So do WT equals 500. And then I need to reload all this show text stuff. And so now you can see, like, my regular font is more substantial. I could do the same type of thing with the bold. And so let's give that a shot. where we could then do bold.wt, and that's usually 700. So let's make that 800 to make it a bit more bold. So again, we have to run all this show text stuff. And so now you can see like my bold is more bold, my regular is more bold, right? Again, the fonts aren't like a perfect reproduction of theirs, but it's good. All right, so now we want to do wording effects policy popularity, but we want it to be their serif font. And I actually forget what their serif font is. And I think in the past, we have used Domine as the font. So Domine is this, which kind of looks like their font. So let's try it, and we'll go from there. Okay, so let's do font add Google Domine, and I'll call it Domine. Get again all this stuff loaded, and I think for my plot title, we'll do element text, because there's no markdown that's going to be added, and we'll do face equals bold, and then we'll also do family equals Domine. And so that gets us that, but it's not nearly as bold as I would like it to be. So let's go ahead, back up here, and we'll then do bold WT equals 800. Again, reload all that stuff. And it goes back to a regular font. And I think that might be because the bold only goes up to 700 for Domine. So that's a pain. So then it goes back to like the regular font. So let's look at modern serif fonts, and pick a different font. Let's see. This shouldn't be so hard. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and just pick one of these top ones. Maybe this Cantana 1. Let's make sure it has a strong font. Nope, it only goes to 400. Okay, that's not gonna work. I think there's a Nodo serif that looks like that. I think that's cool. And it goes 700, 800, 900. Okay, let's use Nodo serif. Okay, it doesn't matter. We just want things to look nice, right? Nodo serif, and I'll call this Nodo underscore serif. Get that loaded. And then down here where I had Domine, I'll do Nodo underscore serif. And so that is a regular font. Do 700. That gets that bolded. It seems bolder than the Domine was at 700. I don't know why it's not doing 800. Let's do 900. Yeah, that's weird. All right, well, let's roll with 700. For some reason, it's not grabbing the stronger weight or the heavier weight. All right, well, I don't want to spend too much time on that. Let's go ahead then and adjust the margin around the subtitle, because there's a fair amount of space between the subtitle and the title above it and the first caption below it. So let's come in here and we'll do margin equals, and then we could again do margin, it's gonna be different sizes. So we'll do margin T equals 30, B equals 20. We'll pick those and then we'll adjust. Yeah, we'll adjust. So let's go ahead from 30 down to say 15. Okay, we can go down further. Let's go to say 10. Okay, we can go even further. Let's try 7. That's, let me put these right next to each other. That's pretty good. Maybe we could do, oh, I think we need to increase the line height too for the subtitle. Let's go up to 1.5. Whatever. Okay, so I think the top margin is better. And then the bottom margin we need to pull up. So let's do 10. And we can add a little bit more. Let's do 12. That's okay. 13, and we'll call it good. Okay. So now we've got, I think, our titles all look good. One challenge that I see is that there's a bit of space, a bit more space between the captions or between the panels, the facets, and theirs compared to mine. Also, I noticed that my bars are thicker than theirs, but I think if I add space between the facets, that'll shrink the size of the bars. And along the way, we'll probably also want to shrink the size of that font for the support, and NYC should do this. So we can do this with panel.spacing. Let's do Y. I don't know that we need to do Y, but we'll do that. And the argument that it'll take is unit. So let's do 10 points. And so now we see we have more space. And we see that like everything is basically sitting at the same position. Maybe we could add a little bit more space. So what happens if we go to like 15? Yep. Okay, that adds more space. Maybe too much space. So let's take that back down to say 13. I think that's pretty good. There's maybe too much space above the caption. So if I go back up to this caption, that was the top. Let's go down to 20. Yeah, I think that looks pretty good. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good match. Someone says, is it my eye? The overall look and feel of the colors is more pale compared to the version we're making. That is possible. It might be that I'm not, like the colors, for whatever the digital color meter isn't as faithful as I'd like it to be, but I don't know. I think it's okay for our purposes. Let's go ahead and make the font in the bars a little bit smaller, and I think the text, the percentage a little bit smaller too. So that was in geom text, right? And so we used 10 and 10. Let's go to say 9.5 and 9.5. I don't know. I think that's probably good enough. I'm gonna say that that's good. So Mike says, amazing to make a faceted ggplot that doesn't look like you used facets. Yeah, I mean, one of my goals when I use ggplot, and one of the reasons I like doing these types of live streams, is because I don't know that you would look at this and say, wow, they use ggplot to make that, right? I think there's value to kind of stripping out some of the, I don't know, like the defaults, right? Like you can do a lot to make the plots look a bit more attractive. As I'm looking at this, one of the things I notice is that like, I think their text for like support NYC and the percentage, I don't know that it's black. Maybe it's like a really dark gray. I don't know. They're kind of just like poking at things here. We could do color equals gray 40. Let's do gray 50. Yeah, maybe it should be gray 30. I don't know. Let's try the other one too. The other geom with the label. Right. So this was color equals gray 30. I think that's a pretty close representation. The title font is a little bit goofy. I don't know why that's behaving so weird, but whatever. I think on the whole, we get the idea. And again, the idea that that Mike mentioned, that we're using facets without recognizing we're using facets. Yeah, so let's see what else. The percent is in gray. Yeah, it's like, it's not the same gray as like the bottom here, but it's not like black. I think I used gray 30. So it's got a bit of white added to black, if you will. It's more subtle. Cool. And Mark says yours looks bolder. I don't know. I think my font is still a little bit bigger than their font, which might be why it looks bolder. But I like mine. I like theirs. I think this was a lot of fun. One of the other things that we were able to touch on a little bit was using this margin auto function. I think we used it in a couple places. Maybe only, we used it up here on my line 46 and down here on line 61. I think that's a really helpful feature that they've added. I would love it if they could actually make this like the default, so that I don't have to go back and forth between like margin and margin auto. Like if margin just worked like margin auto, that'd be great. When would I use margin versus margin auto? Well, I would use margin auto if I wanted to use the same margin all the way around, right? Or if I knew like the top and bottom needed to have the same margin and the left and right needed to have the same margin. Versus what you often see me do is to define specific margins, right? Like the top should be 20 and the bottom should be 10 or what have you, right? Or here we tried with like L being 3 and R being minus 100, right? Now, what I'm doing in these videos is a bit artificial. I mean, it's very artificial, right? Like I am not going to be making this plot for my day-to-day work. I'm making these plots to help me learn more about R. But if I made a plot for a presentation or for a paper or something else, I probably wouldn't be using such specific margins like I do in these videos, right? So I think in my day-to-day work, I would probably use margin auto quite a bit more, because I could like repeat the same margin for like top, bottom, right, left, like I was saying, right? So that would be my initial thought on using margin auto. I'm going to ask them that idea about if it's possible to take text information from theme and use it within geom text, because I very often repeat the same type of stuff in my text annotations that I'm using down here, right? Like I'm certainly using the same font family, and it would be nice to have the sizes be relative to everything else, right? So like if I see like the annotation font in my figure is the same size as like the x-axis label, I'd like it to be the same, right? So anyway, that would be something that maybe is in the work, or maybe something that will go into like version 4.0.1. But anyway, I would really encourage you to check out this blog post on from the tidyverse website. I'll go ahead and put the link in the chat one more time if you all want to check that out. They've got some examples that go along with the different things that they are talking about being in the new version of the package. But yeah, here we go. Again, theirs is on the left, mine is on the right, and I would encourage you to play with this on your own. And if you think my colors are a little bit off, have at it, right? See if you can make the colors look a bit more faithful. And I don't know, sometimes weird things happen with the displays and those digital color meters. I'm not going to worry a lot about it, but again, I think the big thing here was using facet wrap and using theme to style the titles, as well as then using geom text two ways. One, to put the percentage off on the right side, and one to put the choice within each of the bars. All right. So again, if you come across cool visuals in your journey through consuming the media or looking at scientific literature or whatever that you think are cool and you would like me to play with, or you're wondering how I might go about taking that on, by all means, send it my way. Please tell your friends about what we have been doing here on these live streams with Code Club. Keep practicing with all this, and I will see you next time for another episode of Code Club.